Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Bro-est Bros You Knows. Here's your host, Fiat.
That was my lovely wife, Margaret. Thank you so much for that amazing intro. I'm going to take a moment real quick to give a shout out to the friendly people over at DC Dog Runner. DC Dog Runner is a professional dog running service. It was founded to promote health and fitness through vigorous exercise. They're excellent. They'll teach your dog how to run with you. They have experienced trained runners, and they provide your pets with the workout that they need. They currently service the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. Please check them out. Their website, dcdogrunner.com. I'll be putting a link below in the description. You guys can check them out. And right now, if you use promo code GOTTARUN, they'll give you an extra free running session. A walk is good, a run is better. DC Dog Runner, check them out. Okay, yeah, so this week's actually a little confusing for me. If you listen to our Super Bowl episode last year, usually for Super Bowl weekend, there's a couple things that I look forward to. So 50 years ago, some students at the undergraduate university that I went to, the University of Dallas, the best damn school that is, decided that they needed yet another reason to celebrate, to bring joy into their lives between the winter breaks and spring break. So they decided to celebrate Groundhog Day. Not Groundhog's Day. It's just Groundhog Day. We actually have a large contingent of UD alumni up here in DC. Every year we have a little get together, a little party, and it's usually on Super Bowl weekend. And so it's let's see here. In the past, we would have something on Friday. Saturday would always be the big UFC pay-per-view fight, and we're already getting gypped of that. It's no longer a pay-per-view fight. I guess on the bright side, it's a free fight, but still, you know, we got gypped a heavyweight title bout. So that sucks. And then, of course, the main event, the Super Bowl, Panthers versus Broncos. I have a feeling that the Panthers are going to have this one. Who do you guys have? Sound off in the comments below. Alright, we're just going to get right into it. Got some pretty interesting things to cover. Last week, we had UFC Fight Night New Jersey. That was interesting. If you listen to our last Bro-est Bros, we broke down the Ryan Bader, Anthony Johnson, what we thought was going to happen. And I said on there, I don't think that the skill level between Ryan Bader and Anthony Johnson, I don't really think that it's that far off. But Johnson just has that, you know, that X factor, that pure knockout power. And that just really changes the dynamics a lot in the fight. You know, people are, they're afraid, and they have, I mean, for good reason. And, I mean, you saw in that fight, Ryan Bader, people were saying that he was shooting in, desperately trying to take that fight to the ground immediately. I think he said afterwards he was actually changing levels, trying to fake the takedown and go for an uppercut or something like that, and then Johnson sort of just initiated takedown himself, controlled the position, and from there Bader was just sort of in survival mode. He went for a desperate Kimura, and then you just do not want Johnson to mount you and rain bombs on your head. That was over pretty quick. Let's see here. I think I didn't, you know, I said it would be a first round finish. I didn't think it was going to be under a minute. I think it ended up being a minute 30. So Anthony Johnson, that's a scary dude. It'll be fun to see him fight Jon Jones. I think, I don't know if Cormier has, you know, it would be a combination of Jon Jones having an off night and Cormier having the fight of his life for him to win that one. I think Jon Jones wins that. I'm really looking forward to Jon Jones, Anthony Johnson. That should be a lot of fun. Other big news in MMA this week, Benson Henderson. He left to go to Bellator. It's a big free agent signing for Bellator. That's a big name. It's not that they haven't been able to sign some big names in the past, but and in many ways you could argue Benson Henderson may be on the downside of his career. I think he's still sort of in his prime-ish. but probably on the downward side of that. He's still definitely, if he fought at lightweight, I think you would still consider him a top 5 guy. At welterweight, he just hasn't really fought anybody yet. I don't. There's just a bunch of murderers at the top of welterweight. I don't think in the UFC he would have ever been a contender. But I think at lightweight, he was still a contender. But perhaps on his way down the pecking order. It's a great signing for Bellator. I think it does kind of show, or at least demonstrate to the MMA fans that there's a little bit of discontent with the Reebok deal. I know what it sounds like. Dana White said that the Bellator numbers were more money up front. Potentially the UFC would have offered him more money if he became champion again. That's not just like him being good enough and winning fights and earning that belt. That's, you don't really control whether or not you get a title shot, or there's just so many different factors that you don't really control there. So if it's just about the for sure money versus that potential money, I understand that. But I think a big reason here is that there's a lot of sponsorship money that some of these fighters leave on the table to fight in the UFC. We've had some fighters voice their opinion over that. It looked like it was an amicable breakup. Dana White has a history of sort of putting fighters on blast that leave. This seemed to be a very nice and cordial parting. So good luck to Benson Henderson. I've always been a big fan of his. I think he still has a great career ahead. And, he's kind of a big fish over there in Bellator. He immediately goes in and is probably one of the biggest names on that roster. So good luck to him. The CSAC, California State Athletic Commission, has put in an emergency regulation to stop or prevent extreme weight cuts. And they're going to do 2 things. One, they're going to stop the use of IVs. And they're also going to implement a urine gravity test. The no IVs thing, that's the UFC has been doing that. The UFC follows US ADA guidelines, and that doesn't allow fighters to use IVs anymore, which is, I think a step in the right direction. That's a good thing. This would take it a step further with the urine gravity test. And again, I think this is a good thing. A lot of these measures, it's not about, I think the thing that captures the public's attention are things where fighters do things where there's a perceived advantage. They're taking some kind of supplement or steroid or whatever, and the idea is you're cheating. And that's true, and that's bad for the integrity of the sport. But something that's even more important than that is just the safety of the fighters. So a lot of these substances that they're taking, they're just not good for the long-term health of the fighters. And extreme weight cutting, just draining your body like that, that's just not good on the athlete. You need to look no further than the guy that's going to be fighting this weekend, Johny Hendricks. He's had a history of having trouble making weight, almost laughably so. It wasn't so much that he didn't make weight against that Tyron Woodley fight. He didn't even get to the scale. He was hospitalized. That's how brutal that was for him. Another person, that big UFC fighter, current interim light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier, had a similar thing, and that weight cut, it didn't just cost him his career; it almost cost him his life. And he's been able to recover and then come back, have a fantastic UFC career. But still, we should encourage our fighters to be safe. It's better for the sport overall. We get to see fighters fight at their peak. We get to see them have longer careers. That's great for the fans. It's great for the fighters. This is a good thing that CSAC is doing. And I know a person that would be a big fan of these new anti-extreme weight cut measures. I blanked on his name on the last show, and this is the guy that Johny Hendricks has hired. What is the term? It's not dietitian. He doesn't like being called a dietitian. His name is Luis Giordano, and he's a professional nutritionist. I heard him in an interview, and he made a point, the person interviewing him, that he is not a dietitian like Mike Dolce. Diets are temporary. What he's doing is a lifestyle change. And you listen to some of the things he's talking about. Johny Hendricks, this guy used to balloon up to 215, 220 in between fights. That's crazy. And now he's saying that we're not going to see Hendricks really balloon up like that. He's kind of targeting Hendricks around 190. I think the philosophy that he has is really great. And it is that you don't really have that much of an advantage, even if you come into the fight the bigger fighter. If you're coming in tired, if you were drained from your extreme weight cut, and you're only 60 to 70% of the fighter you usually are, it's better to come in a little bit lighter, a little bit trimmer. You're going to be quicker, you're going to have more energy, and then you're just going to be stronger. You're going to be able to fire off those muscles at 100%. And I think the idea, he said that, when Hendricks gets on top of a guy, because his energy levels are going to be so high, even if he is a little bit lighter than he was in previous fights on Fight Night, he's going to feel heavier. I think he said that we should see a Johny Hendricks that's between 180, 182 on Fight Night. Another thing he brought up is that fighters, there is a natural weight that fighters should fight at. It's tough because you wanna cut down and get that advantage and be the bigger, stronger fighter. I mean, as crazy as it is, Anthony Johnson has he's fought at welterweight before, which is just insane. And then he tried to fight at middleweight. And then we've seen him have some success at heavyweight. So I guess sometimes it just takes a while for a fighter to kind of settle in and find the right weight class. For Johny Hendricks, I guess that weight was about 180. That was when he said that it was a little bit hard for him to lose any more weight. So that's a good fighting weight for him. I mean, we've seen him on Fight Week before. I remember, before the Robbie Lawler fight. I think the first Robbie Lawler fight, and he was with Mike Dolce, and Mike was talking about how he's like 190 right now, but we have all this food and that he's eating, that he's gonna naturally sweat out a bunch of stuff and all this stuff, and he's gonna get down. It's a big change. I mean, we're talking about Johny Hendricks that came into Fight Week 20 pounds over, but now he just shared a photo online. This was on Tuesday. A really, really slim and ripped looking Johny Hendricks, and the caption was that he weighed 173, so he's 3 pounds off. That's crazy. So I think this is good for the sport, and it's not so much about the performance of the fighter not being 100% because of the extreme weight cuts. It takes a while for your body to properly rehydrate. It leaves you more susceptible to absorbing brain damage. Protecting the fighters is always good. Tim Means, he's out. Failed a test, allegedly. Ariel Helwani was quick to point out that there is an appeals process. Sometimes they do have false positives in these tests. So, innocent until proven guilty. And I was... The replacement would be Donald Cerrone, except Donald Cerrone is fighting Tim Means, but that's usually the go-to guy. So I guess this Tim means that we'll need to find another Cowboy to scrap with Cowboy. UFC 199 has been announced. It's going to be a rematch between Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman. Personally, I would have preferred Rockhold get somebody else. Man, Weidman just got his butt whooped, Maybe he needed another fight. But before he he did his little stupid spinning back fist, it was a fairly close fight. Looking forward to that one. All right, the main event. Let's start with Stephen Thompson. He's a dynamic striker, incorporating his kickboxing and his karate, and he's not afraid to get after you. Now, I'm going to take a moment to highlight some of the things I think Stephen Thompson does really well, and parts of his game I think he's going to try to incorporate against Johny Hendricks. He likes to employ a lot of evasive techniques, And by this, I mean he's using a combination of great footwork and a little bit of trickery to just stay out of the range of his opponent's strikes, while keeping himself in range to throw off some counters of his own. Now I'm going to highlight a couple of the tricks he uses to bait his opponents in. The first one is that he keeps his hands down low to invite his opponent to go for that head strike. If you listen to our Bro-est Bros in the past, you'll know that I've pointed out that a lot of elite level strikers have gone with this hands down approach, kind of bait their opponents in. And what they're using a combination of constantly touching their opponent, parrying, and using their footwork to get out of the way of strikes, as opposed to the hands up and just blocking. Another thing that we'll see Stephen Thompson do, and we've seen this with some of the neo footwork guys like Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw, but he is not afraid to switch up his stances. And he'll do this, again, sort of tricking his opponent, baiting them in. He'll switch his stance, southpaw or orthodox, depending on how his opponent's standing, to sell the illusion that he's closer than he actually is. You'll see that most of the tricks he employs have the same fundamental principle, is it allows him to keep his distance where he feels most comfortable fighting, and to bait his opponents to come after him. And Stephen Thompson, he'll really like to fight at range against Johny Hendricks. One, he's the longer fighter, he has the longer reach, but also he employs some really, really deadly kicks, and he's going to really want to stand at range and set those up. Now I'm going to highlight a few techniques I think Stephen Thompson does really well. The first, it's what we call a pull counter, or a rock back counter. And essentially what happens is he's leaning back and he's transferring all of his weight onto his back leg. He's not actually stepping back. So he's grounded, and he's leaning back and moving out of your strike. And usually this is in anticipation for a more linear attack. So if a guy is coming after him with like a jab or something like that, he'll rock back and then immediately come back. And he doesn't like to just counter with like one shot. He'll go at you with a combo. He's one of those fighters that can employ a multitude of attacks from both stances. Being a fully ambidextrous fighter, I think that's tough. I think you can kind of fool people into thinking that. And when you see Stephen Thompson, yeah, he can switch stances, but his attacks will change depending on what stance he's in. So whenever he employs that pull counter off of an orthodox stance, he likes to go back and shoot that 1-2. And then if you see him from his southpaw stance, he'll actually throw that rear straight and then follow it up with a hook. A slight variation on combinations depending on his stance. As a counter striker, he's not incredibly accurate, but he is quick and he's intelligent enough that even when he misses, he doesn't overcommit and doesn't put himself in a really, really bad position. Unfortunately for Stephen Thompson, sometimes we've seen that he does have to kind of overcommit a little bit in order to really, really connect on some of those combinations. And he's not one of those one-shot knockout kind of guys. So if Johnny's able to establish control early, you might see Stephen Thompson start trying to overcommit slightly, and he'll open himself up for a Hendricks counter in order to maybe win some points back in the judges' books. Another technique that Stephen Thompson uses, you see him and you'll just see him use a bunch of different kicks. So one of the things I'd like to highlight is his hook kick. The reason why the hook kick is such an interesting technique, it's the way he uses it. He kind of throws it karate style, and it's an extremely quick and speedy technique. And he doesn't really telegraph it, so it's hard to anticipate as an opponent. And because it's so quick, he can recover from it and go back into a stance. So there's little risk from him throwing it. His opponent isn't really going to be able to like capitalize and change levels, take him down, or a counter or something like that. It's so speedy and you're immediately back into your stance. But just throwing it there makes the opponent kind of second guessing. So if I'm coming in Am I going to get smashed with a hook kick? And so he throws it, and I think a little bit of it is just to kind of get that in his opponent's mind, like it's a threat, and it allows him to kind of set up his other techniques. I think on the feet, Stephen Thompson will have the advantage against Johny Hendricks. He's just a more dynamic striker. If it gets to the ground, that's when it's going to be a little tough. It's going to be a little tough. We saw it against Matt Brown. You know, it wasn't so much that he was losing the exchanges on his feet. It was when it got to the ground, Matt Brown was winning those jiu-jitsu exchanges. And you see Stephen Thompson when he fights on his feet. It's very quick. He's not hesitant. He's fighting on an instinctual level. But on the ground, sometimes you can kind of see him pause a little bit. It's almost like he's going through his progressions, like, what do I do here? And he tends to kind of overthink certain situations. Whereas you saw Matt Brown was just so much more comfortable with his jiu-jitsu, and he was able to capitalize and continually attack. And it just seemed like Stephen Thompson's just a step slower on the ground. So I'm sure he's been working on that. He's worked with GSP on his wrestling. He trains with Chris Weidman. Little known fact, but how he got in touch with Weidman. Weidman actually brought him into his camp that first time he fought Anderson Silva for the belt. And remember, Chris Weidman went into that a huge underdog, and he actually brought in Stephen Thompson to kind of mimic a lot of what Anderson Silva does, and you'll see a lot of his strikes. No one fights quite like Anderson Silva. He's so unique. But Stephen Thompson, you'll see some things there where he throws things and it doesn't quite look like how other fighters fight. He's very a unique striker, and like having a guy like Chris Weidman, who's a great wrestler himself. That's gotta help. But still, at the end of the day, this guy doesn't want to be taken down by Big Rigg, whose wrestling is some of the best in the biz. 2-time national champion, 1-time runner-up. Johny Hendricks' wrestling is really, really good. All right, so let's talk about Johny Hendricks a little bit. We've seen the pictures. He's slimmer. He's gonna make weight, or we shouldn't say that yet. But he looks like he's on track to make weight, which is great for the fans. We've talked about how Stephen Thompson will want to keep this on his feet. Johny Hendricks isn't horrible on his feet. Throughout his UFC career, he's kind of made a living with his hybrid wrestling boxing style. There was a time there where he was knocking people out left and right. And he has a little bit of that Anthony Johnson X factor in him, where he just kind of has that KO power, and we've seen that against elite level competition. He hasn't been knocking out people lately. Under the guidance of kickboxing coach Stephen Wright, he's really cleaned up his striking, and he's incorporated that Dutch kickboxing really well, pumping a really, really solid jab and setting up combinations and ending them with leg kicks. We saw him incorporate leg kicks over and over again against Robbie Lawler, and we saw it again against Matt Brown. He has nice, quick, clean combinations, and I think one of the interesting things, Stephen Thompson's he wants to fight from distance and be right outside of that boxing range. But Johny Hendricks actually traditionally struggles a little bit at boxing range. He actually kind of prefers his opponents kind of stay at distance. He's really good. He doesn't particularly have long arms, but he covers distance remarkably well. And his left overhand, that's his weapon. That's his nuclear bomb. And so he's covering a tremendous amount of space, and he's hitting you maximum power with that overhand fully extended. He likes setting that up by sort of throwing that right hook and following up with that left overhand. So generally he likes it when you give him a little bit of space. We'll bring a couple fights, but Carlos Condit, similar to Stephen Thompson, also wanted to keep Johny at range and use some of his strikes, his kicks, and stuff like that. And Hendricks was able to connect. You contrast that with his Robbie Lawler fight, and Robbie was very comfortable standing and banging in the pocket. And that sort of took a little bit of the muster out of his power. He wasn't able to connect fully extended. That sort of took away that part of his game, and Lawler was able to kind of stay in the pocket, stuff him a little bit. And Stephen Thompson's not going to be comfortable doing that, which means Johny Hendricks is going to have his super weapon available all night. And he employs it both as an attack and as a counter. Part of Johnny's game is contingent on his opponents respecting his power. And as soon as you start backing up from Johny Hendricks, that's when he's most dangerous. Is when he's following you up and you think you're out of boxing range, and he's just able to cover distance really well, and then he tags you, and then it's lights out. When he's countering, he'll just he'll use his right hand, kind of parry your strike, and then boom, he'll throw that left overhand. You know, we saw this in the Robbie Lawler fight. He's finished up his combinations with low kicks, so he'll fire off that hook, overhand combination. He'll go to a 1-2 leg kick, and sometimes he likes to throw that low leg kick and then follow it up with a left overhand. So I think it's going to be really interesting. For us, the hobby broke down this fight, and he emphasized that Stephen Thompson will want to fight at range, and Johnny's going to want to kind of get in close. And I agree with that. Like, Johnny is going to want to get in close, and we're going to get to his wrestling in a little bit. But I think, Stephen Thompson kind of being at range, that's not going to be as much of a disadvantage to Johny Hendricks as one might think. He actually kind of prefers his opponents to stay out, just right outside that boxing range, and he'll use his ability to cover distance. And then there's a difference. Stephen Thompson can hit Johnny with a couple things. We've seen Johnny eat some bombs from Lawler. Stephen's going to have to do a good job of not being linear, angling out, and constantly putting on pressure. At some point, I see Johnny biting down that mouthpiece and going for it. And if Stephen Thompson tries to employ something like a pull counter, he's going to be right there in range for Johny Hendricks to smack him. We don't know how Johnny's going to look at his new weight, in this new slimmer, sleeker physique. Luis Giordano going to talk up how great it is. And, of course, Hendricks, as a fighter, you're never going to say, like, negative stuff going into the fight. It's all going to be positive. But we won't know until we actually see him. So we don't know if it's affected his strength. But traditionally, Johny Hendricks has been, I'll bring up Yushin Okami. I just remember, I thought this was so funny. But usually when you have the fighters walking towards the ring, they'll have three things. They'll put like three things at the bottom of the screen that like they're good at. So it'll be like excellent grappler, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, great striker, like whatever. And for Yushin Okami, it was very strong. That was one of his strengths. Johny Hendricks is very strong for his weight class. He's really good at establishing control in a clinch exchange. We see him when he goes into the clinch, and he'll just be able to control his opponent with a single collar tie, and then just start battering him with short shots and uppercuts. And another thing that he does really well, we saw this in the Georges St. Pierre fight. Once he gets in that clinch position against the cage, he will throw those knees right into the opponent's thigh. It's a very effective shot. He does it really well, and it really saps the opponent of their explosiveness. We've already talked a little bit about Johny Hendricks' superior wrestling skills. To really illustrate this, you look no further than his takedowns. He is really, really good at taking his opponents to the ground. This is something Stephen Thompson is really going to have to look out for. The primary way he likes to initiate it is just straight up, double leg. He'll blast into his opponents, and if he can turn the corner, he'll be able to take his opponent down. Otherwise, he's going to have them pinned up against the cage. Once he has them against the cage, he'll change levels and initiate a single leg takedown, and then try to bring down his opponents that way. it's hard to really gauge Johny Hendricks' Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills. We haven't really seen him use it too often, and when we do see him use it, he uses his Jiu-Jitsu in a defensive manner. And by that, I mean we usually see him use his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to get back up on his feet, or to turn it into a wrestling exchange. An example of this, we've seen him in the past when his opponents have gotten top position, and as soon as he gets into half guard, he uses that knee to kind of prop and gain separation. Now, we know in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the name of the game is to stay in close, stay in tight. That's how you initiate those submissions. For Hendricks, he's actually trying to create that separation, and as soon as he's able to create the separation using his knee, he's going to flip, get position, and then try to turn it into a wrestling exchange. Really smart on his part because of his superior wrestling skills. This is going to be a classic case where Stephen Thompson is going to want to keep it standing, and Johny Hendricks is going to want to take this fight to the ground. We'll see fairly early on how the weight cut treated Johny Hendricks. If indeed he's this new and improved Johny Hendricks, has all of this newfound energy, and that could be very scary. I think that Stephen Thompson's going to be very comfortable standing right outside of boxing range, and I think that also favors the former champ. That's where he wants Stephen Thompson to be able to unload that overhand left. I think bottom line, Stephen Thompson has the advantage with his stand-up and his striking. I don't think that's as much of an advantage over Johnny's advantage on the ground and in the clinch. I think Johnny's ability to be able to take Stephen Thompson to the ground, or even just threaten Stephen Thompson with a takedown, is going to set up some strikes, and I think they're going to be devastating ones. I see Johny Hendricks being able to establish control early on in this fight, and I see him finishing Stephen Thompson in either the second or third round. What do you guys think? You guys agree? Disagree? Sound off in the comments below. Guys, it's Super Bowl weekend. Go drink responsibly. Have fun. Whether you are a Panthers fan or a Broncos fan, I think we can all agree the Monday after Super Bowl weekend should be a national holiday. Guys, we're going to be hitting you up with a lot more content here at Bro-est Bros You Knows. Subscribe to keep updated with the latest content. Check out our website, vividcarrot.com. If you liked the episode, give us a thumbs up. If you have any critiques, criticisms, feedback, whatever, we'd love to hear from you. Sound off in the comments below. Thanks for listening. And guys, until next time, we are the Bro-est Bros You Knows.